Welcome to the Sharing for Good video interview. And today we have Sarah Blin, who is the Country Director of Handicap International and also Vice Chair of the Association of International INGOs in Nepal. Welcome to the program, Sarah.
Thank you.
How do you assess disability sector in Nepal, given the experience that you have in other countries?
It would sound surprising, I think, for the disability community to hear me say this, but I think compared to other places, there's really a lot of interesting things that are happening. The civil society groups are very dynamic. The National Federation does a lot of things in terms of lobbying and advocacy for the rights of people with disability to advance, which is really what their mandate is. I think the problem is that on the ground, due to the general poverty of the country and the constraints of the country, I think the situation is still very difficult for many people with disability. There are issues of stigma and discrimination that affect other categories of the population, but we often talk about the double burden of being disabled. You know, there's poverty or gender, and then on top of this, if you're disabled, your situation might be even more difficult. There's stigma, and there's just the general levels of poverty, difficulty of accessing services that affect differentially people with disability. I think for Handicap International, we feel that the work that we've done has been really moving quite fast. I mean, if I think of 10 years of support, for example, to the rehabilitation sector, of course, institutionally at central level, things take more time because the government also has its own constraints. But actually, there's been really amplification in terms of accessing services. Many more people now are able to access services that did not really exist 20 years ago in the country. So this is a very fast and sustainable change that I haven't seen in other places. And in Handicap International, we often use Nepal as an example of how to make sustainable changes to services.
And what strategies have you devised or adopted to bring about this kind of successes, given the situation of poverty in the country and also given the transition the country is in?
If I speak only of the rehabilitation sector, so this is really, it's a field in Nepal that so far doesn't belong to the health sector. I mean, it should, but it's under the Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare. So this is about accessing mobility devices, wheelchairs, crutches, prosthetic, orthotics. We started supporting organizations that were not involved in this type of service. So we really created these services from scratch. But we had a long-term plan where we said to the organizations, we will gradually pull out our financial support and our technical support, and you will need to find your own resources to compensate for the withdrawal of Handicap International. And we had a 10-year plan for this. Now we're at a level of autonomy of about 60%. So the centers find 60% of their own budget. So they're not fully autonomous, but they're really trying to find government resources at central level or at local level, other charities that may be able to support in order to sustain their services without jeopardizing services to the very poor. So we want to maintain the fact that these services are for very poor people primarily. Richer people can pay for their service. So this is one strategy that we use, and we always engage with central governments. I mean, at the moment we have a very fruitful discussion both with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Social Welfare. And I think we're quite pleased that the two ministries are now talking to each other and understanding better what health issues are linked to disability. And I think, at least for Handicap International, we cannot think of implementing a project that doesn't have a wider impact at national level. We don't just support a small district. You know, we really want to have a national impact, and I think that's quite a good strategy to ensure ownership and sustainability.
Can you tell something about the personalized social support and how effective it has been to facilitate the process of empowerment at individual level?
So personalized social support is an approach that we are currently using in our Access to Employment project, which is funded by USAID. It's an approach that we use in many different countries that tries to adapt the reality of the job market and the ambition of the individual. So in many cases, people with disability either are over-ambitious on what they can do or they have no ambition at all. I mean, most of the time it's the second case. So because they were told all their childhood that they're worthless, that they can't do anything, many times they haven't had access to school, they believe themselves that they cannot have an income or that they cannot work. So we try to work on the project, the personal project of this individual. And the ambition has to match what is available in the environment. So somebody with a disability in Kathmandu will have many opportunities. There's a lot of vocational training centers. You can start school at a later age because there are so many education facilities. There's all kinds of employers. It's very different from if you're in Dadeldura, where you maybe have one tailor, one bicycle repair shop. And so we try to match these two aspects. And the approach is close to a counseling approach. So it has a dimension of supporting the person to achieve that objective, but it's really geared towards action. It's about reaching the results.
So what is the thing that you're most proud of at Handicap International?
I'm very proud of the work that the team has done in rehabilitation. I think the fact that these rehab centers are able to have a vision for themselves and to sustain their own organization without our support, it's a very modest but very good example of what sustainability means. And so many of us use this word. I mean, it's like a practical proof that sustainability is a possibility.
You are currently the Vice Chair of AIN. How is AIN doing?
AIN is doing very well. I think we faced last year and the year before a lot of criticism. I mean, not AIN as such, but its membership. The media was very harsh on us, and sometimes out of their own initiative or because they were being spokesmen of the government. We don't really know, but we felt that this criticism was often undocumented and unjustified. So we looked at our own business and we really try to get ourselves better organized. We reviewed our strategic plan. We have a very clear action plan on what we want to do. We have a number of working groups, and all the working groups have a renewed mandate for more quality engagement with the donor community and with government and other civil society groups. We are really focusing on this idea that we are a global and significant force in Nepal in different sectors, and that we need to be acknowledged as such by the government and by donors. I mean, if I take the health sector, it's $20 million a year of support to the health sector. It's a huge amount of resources, and we want to be part of the national debates on these sectoral issues. Also, I think AIN, we are very careful that our operational space is not affected, and I think we felt under a certain threat because of a number of initiatives that the government took, that this operational space was being challenged. And we're getting some very good signals, especially from sectoral ministries, that they're really counting us in. At the same time, we think it's still fragile, and we are careful that the right messages about our work are being spread. And we're really encouraging journalists and government to come and see what we do and to have an open discussion about really how we could do things better and what is expected of us. You know, are we there to deliver services? Are we valuable technical support? Is our role only about advocacy? All these things, we're really happy to have an open discussion with the donors and with governments. So this is what we are working on, and I think, well, at least for my part, I find this very, very exciting and very relevant to other to similar issues in other countries. If I think of my peers, my other colleagues who are country directors, especially in the region, I think we all face these questions. You know, the world is changing, the private sector is more and more interested in working with in poor areas and doing sometimes the work that traditionally INGOs did. And so for the government, it may be a more practical solution. So we have to have an open dialogue about this.
So engagement with the media and with the donors, I mean, is one of two main activities that you are kind of doing.
Yes, engagement with the media, I have to say, has been quite difficult. We feel that, I mean, we have had sessions with journalists where we really try to clarify what INGOs are about and what are our accountability mechanisms, and the fact that we report to governments, we report to our own governments, we report to our donors. I mean, you know, we do a lot of reporting, but there's this idea on the media that we are hiding things. I mean, we've been accused of working for the CIA, and so we've done this a lot last year, but we feel that we need to strengthen that work. Yeah.
How do you respond to some of these so-called accusations?
Well, I think we ask them for evidence, and I think as journalists we feel that they should be providing that evidence and not just making statements. But I think journalists are a powerful force here, and they have there are some other interests in them not providing evidence, I think. So we have to accept that this is part of the game. We've had some also very good engagement with journalists, especially around the flood response. I think we felt that there was, for many months, a lot of criticism of INGOs, but when those floods hit the Midwestern region in August, the media was a lot more generous with us, and that was the evidence of the quality of our work, that there are times when the government really isn't responding, isn't present, and INGOs are always there, and there was enough proof from the work on the ground that we were genuine and our work was of good quality. And I think it helped in our favor.
And how has been the relationship with Social Welfare Council lately?
We've had some very open discussions with Social Welfare Council. I think we got a sense that SWC was not entirely satisfied with the development cooperation policy. That was really the initiative of the Ministry of Finance, and it became complicated for them to understand what their role was towards INGOs if the Ministry of Finance was also taking some initiatives to control more INGOs. So we've had really good open discussions with them about our concern that we are being more and more controlled, and that it's costing us more and more money. And we've also tried to advocate that SWC or an entity that may evolve from SWC has more resources and is better supported by the government. And I think SWC has been, has acknowledged that we are on their side for this. I think for individual NGOs, the relationship with SWC can be can be complicated. I mean, some NGOs, and for HI, we've never had any problems, but I think for some INGOs, it's not so easy at times.
And that's based on what?
Well, you know, I think it would be fair to say that in Nepal, there is often the legal framework is one thing, the interpretation of the legal framework is another. And for INGOs, that has been problematic at times. Big issue that happened last year was around the labor law and the fact that we understood that INGOs were supposed to have labor permits for their expatriate workers, but for a long time it was clear from SWC that we did not need those labor permits. So this interpretation of law can really present difficulties, and it takes a long time to clarify. I mean, we usually find very good ways forward, and in the case of labor permits, the situation was clarified, and everybody regularized their situation. But it's incidents like this that may affect individual INGOs with SWC. Often we get a sense that people feel that we are not transparent, and as I said before, I'll give you an example. I have a friend who works in an international insurance company, and his company is a family business. When his son took over, he said, well, you need to have an audit. And his father, who had been running this company for 45 years, had never heard of an audit. In HI in Nepal, just for the Nepal program, last year we had 5 audits. You know, with the number of the scrutiny on our work is huge. Every single project is audited by the donors. The government audits our accounts. Our national government, the French government, audits my accounts. I mean, there is really very little way to say that I haven't disclosed the nature of my work and of my accounts. So this is a debate that we have with SWC. I mean, they may argue that they don't know enough about what we do, but I mean, I can list the number of interactions that we have with SWC. We have every year we have a central project meeting where we explain what we've done in every single project. Every project is approved by the government. I mean, we meet on a regular basis. There's really many opportunities for SWC and the government to know what INGOs do. Maybe too many, and that's why maybe the information is being lost, and we should focus maybe more on the more essential aspects of monitoring and control by the government.
You represent AIN in the Social Inclusion Action Group, SIAG. How is AIN contributing, and how is the work in SIAG group going on?
So the SIAG group has had a little bit of a difficult time, I think, partly because the membership was not so active, and also because the original mandate of the group needed reviving. So in June last year, we reviewed our strategic plan and looked at the way the group was organized and decided to focus on more practical issues of social inclusion. For AIN's participation in this group was not always a given, partly because it's a donor group, and so some donors were reluctant to welcome AIN. I think AIN brings a lot of practical experience. I mean, there's 115 member INGOs in AIN. Many of us work in areas that are amongst the poorer districts with very poor people. There are some numerous specific projects on caste and ethnicities. There are NGOs who work on inclusive governance, etc. So we have really a lot of practical experience. Sometimes our experience is too practical for this type of engagement, but one of the things that the group wants to work on is a more modern version, definition of inclusion. What does it mean today in Nepal? 10 years on, what do we mean by inclusion? What progress has there been in the political scene? And the UNDAF, the Framework for Action of the UN, gives us a good starting point to look at this, because they have a specific outcome on inclusion. We also want to engage more with the social protection group. So there's a group of donors who support the government in delivering all these social protection schemes that exist in the country. So we're trying to link inclusion to protection, not because we believe that all marginalized groups have to have some form of protection, but more to try to have that discussion and see really what is the rationale between social protection schemes in terms of fighting poverty, fighting marginalization. So these initiatives are very embryonic. We really started looking at our action plan at the end of last year. I mean, I'm hoping that we can do a lot more. I think this group has a lot of potential, and it's always interesting for INGOs to be in dialogue with donors and with the UN, because there's no point in multiplying the groups. I mean, we spend so many times in meetings, we don't need to have yet another forum. So I think there's really a lot of scope for that group.
Sarah, Blin, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, man. Thank you.